Welcome to the Retail Tech Podcast. I'm your host, Darius Basefi, and in this interview, I spoke with Kate Ancketill, CEO of the UK-based digital consultancy GDR Creative Intelligence, and Will Seymour, a senior consultant. GDR works with major brands internationally on digital transformation in a variety of ways, including research, consulting, workshops, and more. How are you today?
Very well, thank you, Darius.
Great, thanks. Great to be with you.
Thank you for taking the time to talk to me. What is GDR Intelligence?
GDR Creative Intelligence is a London and New York-based retail trends consultancy looking at retail and hospitality innovation globally. We look at the channels through which things are sold, not the things themselves.
Okay, so you focus on helping retailers basically improve their operations or experiences?
We work with brands, retailers and manufacturers predominantly, and some hedge fund managers and financial people to understand how the world is changing and the intersection between physical retail and digital innovation and how consumers' behaviors are changing within retail.
Okay. Anything?
Well, I just think the one thing that we really want to see is better customer experiences, and we help all of our clients trying to achieve that.
Right. Okay, so who are some of the clients?
They're all billion-dollar corporates. We pretty much only work with household names. We work with and are retained by and have been for many years P&G, LVMH, Macy's, VF Corporation. We work with, help me out here, Will, brain freeze. American ones I'm trying to think of. On the West Coast we work with Microsoft. They're all absolutely enormously huge. We tend to work with big corporates that have significant insight teams. So that they can work through the kinds of ideation that we provide to them and spread it out throughout the company.
Okay, so typical scenario would be that you would provide feedback or insight to a question from the board of a company, is that?
Yes, absolutely. We have actually a particular division that works exclusively presenting the latest innovations to boards, and obviously we need to keep it very top line, very big picture, very snappy and short, and that's often the case with the financial industry as well. They don't necessarily want to know about the granular aspects of retail innovation, how people are being trained, how new technology is changing an in-store environment, etc. They may want to look at the bigger macro issues of the kind that the presentation today was covering.
When you provide advice, and I say this coming from my own consulting background, not all the time the customer will listen to it. How do you handle that?
Well, actually, we don't implement. We're at the inspirational front end of making our clients look up from their day-to-day job into something that's broader and more inspiring, that comes from other sectors than the sector they're in, because we believe that only through cross-fertilization can you really innovate, not just by chasing the tail of your competitors. So it's not our job to design or create or implement. We give the ideas to the clients and an insight into what innovation might mean for them or what it could look like for them if you put an A and a B together and get a new C, for example. And then we will, if they need us to, connect them to designers, technologists, architects that can actually implement that work for them.
So let's talk about your presentation that you just finished. It was about the future. Some of these futuristic ideas are already implemented in places that we don't know about, and you were having some examples of that.
You're absolutely right. The future is always happening somewhere, and I guess our job is to try and bring that to life for people who aren't aware of that or haven't yet considered how to make use of some of those principles. I think the way we try and sort of bring this to life is show people everything from the sort of huge Amazon Go concept and sort of illustrate what we can learn from that, but right down as well to the sort of two blokes working out of a garage in Croatia on an idea that maybe in 2 or 3 years everyone will be talking about and everyone will know all about. So I think for me, my absolute favorite example, I think, is that Alp Stories beauty store that we saw in Croatia. They've just stuck a little robot in the corner of the store, and they're using that system to supply customized bottles of products to people who walk in. You know, I think it's paradigm changing. It completely changes how you think about what physical retail is for and how it relates to manufacture. I think it's just amazing.
So these are robots that are actually packaging, products.
Yeah. They're formulating, they're packaging, they're applying wrappers, and they're doing that all in response to people in real time in that store demanding certain types of products customized for them.
Okay, that's pretty innovative. Common pattern that I see is really how the store of the future is going to be automated. To what extent and what's going to be first? So it seems like checkout is the first part of the store that's going to be fully automated. And so what happens when you have some stores that the majority of their employees are actually just doing checkout? What happens to those employees? People are saying, well, you can retrain them. You can't retrain everybody for everything. What happened to the other employees in the store? Are they still there, or?
Yeah, I think actually Alp Stories is not necessarily the most useful example to answer this question, because I don't think anyone's being replaced. I think there's just a slightly different service being offered in addition to the traditional offer. But I think your question is really important, and it's massive. That every single exhibitor in this conference has a different view on where automation will happen first and what that means for the people working in that store. And every technology all around us is trying to fit into that question somehow. And I think the first thing to say is that every retailer has a different answer to that question. Some people will be looking at payment first, other people will be looking at procurement, customer service, decision making. All of these things it's possible to automate, and every retailer has to have a really hard think about what they want to do. And if they do take one of those courses of action, then you free someone up to do something better. And I think our line is, even though the sort of doom scenario of mass unemployment thanks to automation is incredibly scary, the opportunity is actually that you can use these people to be far more productive and develop the human relationship skills that we've started this conference talking about.
Right.
Well, and also I'm afraid that the hard economic truth is that some of those people are not going to find themselves employed. There's an insurance company that's just been reported in Japan that has employed IBM Watson at the cost of about $1.5 million in the first year. They've sacked 35 people in direct response to that. They say that they'll make their money back within 2 years and will be making a 30% reduction on those 35 employees. So I think there is a bit of an elephant in the room here that at shows like this, no one can really quite face that we are potentially seeing up to a third of retail workers losing their jobs by 2025, and that's the figure that's been given by the British Retail Consortium. Now, is it retailers' job to decide what those employees then do? Is it the governments? Is it the individuals? These are huge issues that no economy is really yet equipped for. And I think this is something that next year's NRF is probably going to have to be discussing in much greater depth.
Whose responsibility is it to actually help prepare the new generation? People have the potential to do different things if we set the expectation and prepare them properly. And 2025 is not that far away. What kind of examples of really innovative retail stores do you know of in the US?
There are some amazing things happening, and everywhere you look, someone is using a technology in a really impressive way. But for example, one of the examples I really love is a restaurant called Itza in San Francisco. Fully automated quinoa restaurant. You order on your mobile phone, you turn up, your order is fulfilled through a little hatch, and you never see a human being. It's completely self-service. But I think what's really fascinating is the sort of nuts and bolts of what makes that possible. It's being used by other retailers in a completely different way.
Right.
So it's almost like we shouldn't really be talking about the actual technology, the mobile fulfillment, the little hatches, the things like that. We should sort of be thinking at the concept level. And how these fit into what a retailer really wants to do, the stories it wants to tell. One of the best talks I've heard today has been from Italy, which everyone in New York says is their favorite store. the Italian sort of food store. They don't even have e-com. Someone asked him about e-com, and he said, "Our website exists for people who already know who we are, so we don't need to sell through it."
Right.
I think it's absolutely incredible to see how different retailers are using the same technologies to tell completely different stories. We haven't really cracked the sort of formulas for these things yet.
Right, so that's another question. Does every retailer really need to have e-commerce?
Well, I come from Britain, and we are possibly somewhat ahead in this. For us, it is utterly unthinkable for any retailer not to have e-commerce.
Okay.
I mean, we live, eat and breathe online shopping, and I think we adopted earlier than anyone and everyone else.
How does the e-commerce equation work in the overall financial picture of retailers from your experience?
Well, obviously it's more problematic if you are a multi-brand retailer and you're selling items which are by no means unique to you, because then you're only going to go to that brand if they have a more efficient e-commerce delivery and returns back-end system than everybody else. If you, however, are a small independent store and what you're selling is unique, then e-commerce is probably what's keeping you alive.
So ultimately, if the e-commerce experience works really well as it's designed to do, there are some instances where you don't even need the store anymore, right? You can be just direct to consumer online. It's not a local store anymore. If you're talking to the typical mom and shop boutique in London, would you recommend that they actually invest heavily into selling to people online with their website, or invest more on their experience in the store?
I think I would have to say both. I think you can no longer envisage one without the other. For us, it's like, one is meat and one is drink. They just cannot be separated. For the consumer, they want both. They want it all the time. They expect it. It's just absolutely like the air we breathe now. I find it unthinkable that any retailer would consider that they could have a store without an online e-commerce presence, or that they, even the big pure play players are typically moving towards having some kind of physical presence, even if it's only in a pop-up scenario. In the UK, John Lewis has the highest net promoter scores. It's a much loved brand because it's owned by its employees and therefore has very high levels of customer service. And they're a big promoter of this idea that you must have both. You must have an experiential space that's part of the social fabric where people meet and experience things in the real world, but you must always also have incredibly efficient online services.
One other area that I've seen, I think China probably, or Southeast Asia, really pushing the envelope on that, is commerce within chat apps. What do you think is the future of that?
Well,
in the rest of the Western world?
I'm glad you mentioned China. I spend quite a few weeks a year there seeing some of our clients and some of the people we work with there. Yeah, it's absolutely amazing to see how social media has become so different to what we're used to in the West. It's more of an operating system than an app. And so much happens inside it. You're ordering taxis inside chat, you're paying for things in store with chat. Offline to online was invented in China in order to get people through stores more quickly, and everyone's paying through WeChat. And there are some really amazing examples starting to come into the Western world, people learning from this. For example, there's a hotel in Las Vegas which sort of tailors to Chinese tourists, and they let you control your entire environment in the hotel, the blinds, the lights, everything through WeChat. And so they're letting you network already through your social media. And a lot of the sort of initiatives we've seen from the likes of Facebook and Twitter, they're very much in response to Baidu and WeChat, and even what people like Alibaba are doing. But I like to think of these things as leapfrogging. So we don't necessarily always learn from people and end up with the same user experience. We develop things at different times. This is very obvious in financial services. Different markets around the world, completely different financial services systems. Some people using signing, some people chip and pin, some people are SMS texting. Something like 3/4 of Kenyan GDP goes through an SMS payment service. So I think every 5 or 10 years, the paradigm completely shifts and it happens in one place, and we see markets completely leapfrog on top of other ones.
Okay, it seems like there is almost like a cultural aspect
Absolutely.
of how people use technology.
That's really important, actually, and especially in China, you see a lot of engagement with brands through things like shaking your phone, loads and loads of voice, in demographics that we just wouldn't expect in the West. But I would actually caution against holding this in your mind too strongly, because one of the most interesting companies, agency and suppliers that we've come across, they create this little tablet that sits in stores. It's called the PlaySpot, and it basically lets you play a little game. They've been trialing it in the US, in China, getting amazing results, really high engagement with people like Head and Shoulders. And everyone says, oh yeah, that's all well and good, the Chinese, they'll really enjoy that. And they say, we get exactly the same results in any market that we try this. Tried in Europe, same results. Tried in America, same results.
Interesting.
Some things are universal.
One last question. Everybody has a smartphone right now in 2017. What is the next user interface after the smartphone, in your opinion?
Voice, obviously. We are obviously now accustomed to speaking to our computers within private environs, typically our living room. Although I know that the upcoming generations are also increasingly accustomed to speaking to their AI assistants on their smartphones, although I think after a certain age you tend to feel a bit silly doing that. But I'm sure that the time will come when voice will be the dominant interface with all of our digital support systems.
I think this is a really interesting question, and as I've been watching the digital revolution the last few years, then one of the most amazing things is there's no one answer to questions like that. If you were to ask a few years ago what social media network will be king in 5 years' time, people would have an answer for you. You ask that question now, there's no such answer. The generational shift to 2 years. 16-year-olds are using different networks to 18-year-olds and 20-year-olds and 25-year-olds. And I think we're starting to do the same in interfaces. Young, as Kate said, something like half of US teens are using voice search every day. This is inconceivable to people of a certain age. Right. The kinds of social networks, the kinds of games people are playing, I think we're actually going to see a lot of fragmentation. But there's the system behind that we're all accessing.
Right. Thank you so much. Great conversation.